Welcome new Mechwarriors to the Inner Sphere, where you can keep whatever money you find so long as you live to payday. For our first lesson, the Great Houses. Slide please. So the Great Houses are the six, or for people who can actually calculate projection power on an appreciable strategic scale, the four peer states, one remnant, and one hermit kingdom that make up the Inner Sphere. No, it's not a perfect sphere. Yes, there are things outside of it. Today we're talking about these assholes. These are the great houses of the Inner Sphere, and they're all very different in varying ways, but are mostly the same, in that they are all occasionally not very nice to each other. They also possess vast arsenals of planet-killing weapons, and on special occasion will trundle them out for public display. If you want to know why these people are fighting over such vast territory and why they're so committed to erasing portions of their collective industrial base, history, and civilization, well, it's complicated. My best take on it is a two-parter, and most people find that a bit much. So let this serve as a basic introduction to your career in the world of Mechwarriors and a primer on who's most likely to kill you when you inevitably fuck up. But firstly, a disclaimer. I am biased. As a mercenary plying his trade in the Inner Sphere, I find concepts such as warfighting ideology largely a position of what you can cover up from the general public. Mainly because, at the end of the day in the Inner Sphere, it's about you and yours, and smoking craters tell no tales. They make a hell of an autocannon. But to better illustrate my point, let's just dive in. This map is from 3067. Maps from after that are somewhat messed up, for a number of reasons. And on an unrelated note, let's just brush this radioactive ash off here, and there we go. 3067. Don't mind the flickering on the screen, I'm told it's mostly harmless. Mostly. Let's begin with the great houses themselves. I'll be moving clockwise as we go for those of you who understand time, and left-hand feed for people who understand timing. Welcome to the wacky, weird world of the Dracons Combine. Welcome to a pervasive class system, and home to the galaxy's own homegrown, no-bullshit, sword-wielding, authoritarian samurai ruling class. Oh yes, this place is literally built off pre-spaceflight Terran Shogunate-era Japan. It's a monolithic, all-encompassing bureaucratic machine run on war and conquest that thinks optimal Christmas dinner is, by tradition, fried chicken. They're a fun collection of ideas. Behold, this is their throne room. Take that in. This isn't just for show. This is their military. These are their uniforms. These are their mechs. They fight like this all the time. Yes, those swords are very real and do brutal work. Alright, so back to the guy in the chair. It is frequently a guy in charge of this. So this guy is called the coordinator. He runs the place. There is very little distinction between the coordinator as a person and the Dracons Combine as a whole. When people refer to the dragon in reference to Kurita as a house or a nation, it's interchangeable between the two entities. And no, the Dracons Combine doesn't celebrate the godhood of rulership with divine mandate. However, the coordinator's word carries essentially the same weight within their sphere of influence, so I'd not invite trouble, as Kurita tends to bury its enemies deep, headless, and by the million. They have no issues with troubleshooting in government, as trouble should be shot in the Dracons Combine. And if there is anything to fear from these guys, it's that they believe in a manifest destiny which involves House Kurita controlling everything. The Dracons Combine started as an agreement between two worlds, which was then fed war and conquest through House Kurita's leadership. Kurita has had total control since the beginning, aside from that one cadet branch that one time in the family who was wiped out long ago. As far as how this thing runs, well, the 5 pillars represent the Dracons Combine. The pillar of gold is the government. The pillar of steel is the military. The pillar of teak is the people. The pillar of ivory is religion, philosophy, zen, and all that crap. And then there's Jade, the economy. These 5 pillars of state philosophy are represented in the ministries of state organized through them. For instance, the Pillar of Steel encompasses the Ministry of War, the Department of Indoctrination, the Bureau of Substitution, the Assembly of the Grand Inquisitor, the Admiralty, the Physician Staff of the Dragon, and various minor administration authorities. Speaking of authorities, Dracons Combine bureaucracy tends to be impenetrable to outsiders, impossible to reason with, and largely maintains the status quo. Actual decisions are typically made by people with significant military rank, in the form of military governors appointed to oversee civilian authorities. When in doubt, the decision maker is typically the one with the sword. And if you want to see that sword up close and real fast, you only need to fail to take its bearer seriously, or merely disrespect their presence. Also, they had this whole death to mercenaries thing for a while. Not my favorite government to work with. Then again, they rarely need mercenaries ever because the constant fighting and insanity of the samurai class means they're pretty much ready to throw down whenever. If they lack a cause, they'll find one quick. The leaders of the Draconis military are often peerless warlords, equally at home in local shogunal politics or on the battlefields of their neighbors. The Dracons Combine is the state that war built, maintained by Bushido, psychotic warriors, and a shitload of weapons. Finding Kurita forces in your backyard is frequently the precursor to speaking Japanese in your near future, whether you want to or not. Next door is ruled by House Davion, the so-called good kid of the successor houses. The noble one. The one that likes autocannons a lot. That's these guys. Technically, the state is the Federated Sons, and they're another fun monarchy. House Davion is descended from English and French nobility, operating as constitutionally bound monarchs, and has been, since ever, trying to reinforce their position as champions of liberty and personal freedom at every annoying turn. Because of this, most people think House Davion, and by extension, the Federated Sons, are self-righteous assholes. And they are not wrong. Mostly. But see, the story is a bit funny on that. Originally, the Federated Sons was a federation. In time, the founding polities chose delegates to form a high council who would, among themselves, elect a president to lead them. But the political machinations of the Davion family were all about having a monarchy, so they pushed the presidency into that, and since then the Davion family has ruled. Which is really good for them, mostly good for the Federated Sons, and has worked out for the most part. However, Davions being Davions, one had to rule them all, so there was an early Davion civil war. The 5 marches had to decide for themselves who would be the first prince, and sharing was, apparently, not a serious consideration at any point. And the winner of that first early Davion civil war, Alexander Davion, went on to pass more legislation than any of his predecessors because he had total military support. Turns out you can make people vote how you want with a bayonet. However, the story doesn't get any worse really for some time at least. To their credit, House Davion was not a despot. They encouraged then and still champion free speech, individual liberties, and personal freedom. But in the end, it is a monarchy. Considering the mostly beneficial ruling arrangement, some will label Davion a father knows best state, which has many times but not always been justified in its actions. As such, it is seen as one of the more stable houses on account of broad public support. I will admit this. Though they can be miserably righteous and annoying, they're frequently not evil, just smug. And yes, that is just as bad. The armed forces of the Federated Sons have historically been one of the most professional militaries in the Inner Sphere, originally formed from peacekeepers and always kept as modern as state industries could allow. These guys even developed the predecessors to the Warhammer on their own dime in the earliest years of battle mechs. Even when they're wrong, they're almost right. Davion may not pay you well, but they won't bury you for no reason. Mostly. Next door are these guys. I don't like them as much for a number of reasons. The Capellan Confederation is the youngest kid on the block as successor states go. It's a socialistic police state that has almost but not always been under the control of one family, House Liao. The head of the state is the Chancellor, who is, in the Capellan Confederation, one nod away from making you disappear. To say that it is a police state is not an act of hyperbole, but substantiated fact. However, it wasn't always so. What started as a collection of states uniting for common defense and well-being slowly grew over hundreds of years through successive generations of philosophy and leadership from one house into an autocratic state with a centrally controlled economy. Some would say this is a functional dictatorship, but dictators tend toward having some sort of functional agenda or understanding of strategic power. But in truth, there's actually three forces that run this place, at least in theory. They are the Chancellor, the Prefectorate, and the House of Scions. The Chancellor is the CIC of the Armed Forces, Special Forces, and the face of the state in matters of foreign policy. The Chancellor can also make decrees and legislative changes at will. It's a powerful position, to say the least, and has nearly always been a lifetime appointment for House Liao. The Prefectorate is the body of state regional entities and greater nobility. The House of Scions isn't, mostly. Needless to say, the Chancellor seems to get his or her way more often than not. But the other two governmental branches will act to frustrate or block particular agendas. What's interesting about the Capellan Confederation is that its citizens, or rather I should say resident aliens born there, are not citizens. Not yet, anyways. In fact, in the Confederation, citizenship must be earned, and the state is the sole measure of that esteem. Children are legally, in every way, wards of the state under limited provisional supervision granted by the government to their parents or other assigned legal guardians. At age 15, each child is thoroughly examined by the government to see if they have a proven commitment to the state. Those who are deemed worthy gain citizenship. Those who are not are given a grace period for a second evaluation, but failure to measure up as a citizen for any reason results in becoming a non-citizen, which are frequently referred to as state servitors. By the succession wars, this non-citizen class had become an enormous part of the population, a population that, I must state, had no rights and was legally state property. This was reversed in 3052 when Sun Tzu Liao became chancellor and abolished servitor slavery. Not all Capellan chancellors are assholes. Most, though, well, the record speaks for itself. The military of the Confederation Armed Forces have traditionally been the underdog, but have never shied away from a fight. They frequently are pushed into doing far too much with far too little, and on top of it have to face the catastrophic political and military meddling of a chancellor who may or may not understand the difference between entertainment and war. The fact that Capellan state has not been conquered outright speaks volumes to the abilities of the CCAF, who have demonstrated battlefield insanity as a doctrine for nearly 8 centuries. The Capellan economy is centrally planned and is designed on the principle that sufficient planning can overcome any hardship. This has produced mixed results. The Confederation always endures, but at what cost? Next door is the Free Worlds League. I don't say House Merrick because, well, it's complicated. Also, their history isn't terrible as some make it out to be. Yes, the greatest threat to Americ is Americ, but glory to Merrick. But it wasn't always so. The Free Worlds League was actually formed before the Terran hegemony, born out of the early Terran Alliance's colonial struggles and then collapse as an early power. Your homeworld falling apart in early colonization was, well, somewhat on the catastrophic end of things. So nations which weathered that catastrophe learned self-reliance. The Free Worlds League was originally an agreement between 3 existing nations, the Myrick Republic, the Regulan Principality, and the Federation of Oriente. Amazingly enough, the founders of the League owe most of their success to a guy named George Humphreys, who was the negotiator between the 3 nations and was honored as the first Speaker of Parliament for 5 damn sessions. They didn't throw their negotiator away when they came together as a nation. They threw nobody under the bus. Instead, they championed him. That is righteous. So how'd it go down? You see, of the three nations, Merrick was on top locally, and Merrick didn't like the idea of a union at all, not at first. He thought it wouldn't work. Working with others seemed like a bad idea, in fact, considering the state of galactic affairs, but Humphreys wore him down, like a good friend does, and the only reason I bring this up is because what wore him down wasn't politics. It wasn't an appeal to power or glory or riches or conquest or the history books. It was in fact nerd shit. See, Detlev Merrick collected historic awards and trophies. Raju Salaj, Prince of Regulus, collected miniatures, figurines mainly, and books and paintings and the like. And these two guys nerding out about their neat stuff they liked and had collected contributed as much toward the founding of the Free Worlds League as anything else. Ostensibly, the Free Worlds League is a federal republic, with each province granted a grand measure of self-rule and sovereignty, and as you'd expect, the Free Worlds League is a complex creature politically speaking. The Parliament is technically a supreme federal and legislative authority, but there's some caveats to that. For one, membership of the Parliament was, for a time, determined by the amount of taxes paid into the Treasury. And then there's the self-rule problem. All that self-rule means you have all sorts of people in Parliament. Some nations could be dictatorships, others a theocracy, others a democracy, and yet all under one flag. Naturally, this causes some problems. It's why, for the most part, the Free Worlds League, through its history, has operated in a near-permanent state of martial law under the Captain General, who is frequently, but not always, a Merrick. Historically, the power of the Parliament has waned with every major conflict, crisis, or state of emergency, whereas the power of the Captain General has increased. That's right. The Free Worlds League drops their issues at Merrick's welcome mat, rings the doorbell, and runs the fuck home. I don't envy that job. Originally intended for military matters on behest of Parliament, 8 centuries of emergency powers later, the Captain General stands as first among equals, and is more or less House Merrick's personal lordship of the Free Worlds League, with all of the hazards that entails. The Free Worlds League has defined its economic niche through innovative technologies and free trade, which I feel is a response engineered in opposition to the then crumbling Terran Alliance's blanket of tariffs and protective customs laws. The laissez-faire approach to the free world's economic principles has made more friends than enemies. However, poor risk management analysis has caused problems. For instance, after conquering the magistracy of Canopus during the Reunification War, the Free Worlds League invested oceans of currency, industry, and effort into rebuilding the Canopan economy. Canopus returned the favor by outcompeting and underbidding the Free Worlds League economy in the region, by mostly using principally cheaper labor and lots of industry they didn't have to pay to build. This resulted in a 10-year economic recession for the entire Free Worlds League. No good deed goes unpunished. Since, they've learned quite a bit, and have managed their economic affairs with care to guard against the systemic mayhem and shock as caused by other states, good intentions or not. Culturally, the Free Worlds League is a mix. In fact, it is probably the most diverse state there is in the Inner Sphere. The principal language is mostly a derivative of Star League English, but on any given world you might hear Czech, Arabic, or Urdu. With the sheer number of cultures and political systems present in the Free Worlds League, it must be said that if there was anything that unified them, it was not a Merrick, but more an ideology. And that's entrepreneurship, a belief in the free market, and the idea that anybody could make it if they tried. It was from the prosperity of the Star League that this philosophy grew, I feel. The succession wars didn't dampen their spirits either. It merely made them appreciate what they had, and encouraged them to continue fighting for it. And maybe each other from time to time, because hey, glory to Merrick.
Give 'em the old razzle-dazzle.
Next door is the one people make fun of, and for some of the right reasons. Welcome to the Lyron Commonwealth. First of all, few call it that unless they're declaring war or arranging marriage, which if I'm frank might be the same thing in the same afternoon. So welcome to the House of Steiner. The Steiners are the ruling family and have been since virtually ever. They were founded as a merchant and industrialist conglomerate. They never stopped being exactly that. They celebrate their vast wealth by having far too many nobles, far too many noble titles, and historically largely incompetent generals. Save for the occasional flash in the pan, that is. However, if they're strategically incompetent to the point that the concept of their scouting parties operating vastly excessive tonnage, even in modest probing actions, memes based more on truth than you think, then how do they survive, you ask? Well, money and industry, friends. Money and industry. House Steiner's backing is the industrial base and every bank that invested in it. They are the military-industrial complex. There are many good reasons they can afford to dump truck weapons into a situation, operational or not, piloted or not, and then continue to do so until the enemy leaves. While not stupendously famous for warfighting leadership or tactical brilliance, House Steiner can and will bury you with its vast assembly lines led by pretend generals until you give up or they get bored. Every tragic comedy of their strategic planning is mostly covered by the sheer power of their pervasive economy and vast military industry. In its early days, the Lyron Commonwealth was headed by 9 archons as patterned off ancient Athens of Terra, because early post-Terran colonies were like that, very idyllic. Then one guy deposed the other 8, decided to establish the Estates General to run the show, and finally hammer out some agreements on what rights meant. And it's kind of worked out. Technically, the Archon of the Lyron Commonwealth is an absolute ruler, commander-in-chief of all military forces, and can unilaterally make most governmental decisions with a modest nod. They run the show. They even hold the right to grant and remove noble titles in perpetuity, titles which hold significant power. So they're a ruthless autocrat, right? Not really. Most Archons of House Steiner, aside from a few notable assholes who need extensive covering in what I will likely label a historical diss track, are mostly okay people. They delegate most decisions to the bureaucracy, the councils of state, appointed advisors, and the Estates General, and they typically just keep their heads down, or just go to the Solaris thing. Right. The Solaris thing. So there's a bullseye in the inner sphere in the murder for entertainment business, and it's right here. Solaris 7. This is pretty much Steiner in a nutshell. But I'm not an expert in these matters, so I'll turn it over to a local. He can sum it up better. Mr. Fisher, take it away.
Solaris 7 is the only place where you can pay money to watch 2 strangers beat each other to death, while also enjoying a corn dog.
Duncan, that's not true. Canopus exists. They have corn dogs last I went, and a very good Outback.
I think Canopus banned trans fats, my dude. I've only ever seen funnel cake. Oh, and they do a lot of food on a stick. Saves napkins, less to clean up. Stick food is really the way of the future. I wish we'd thought of it first. Sticks truly are the yardstick of food. I'm Duncan Fisher. I stand by this statement. Sticks are the future. Mark my words.
Duncan, this is costing me a fortune.
Oh, right. HPG bills. So, Solaris 7. Murder is more or less very legal, so long as you do it in the box on TV, and everyone has a really great time. In fact, it's fantastic. There's explosions and music, and I'm there. Every night, on every screen. I tell you all the things I think you need to hear, and most of them are very accurate. Very, very accurate. Anyways, this is Duncan Fisher signing off, and this appearance cost Professor Tex 1,485 C-bills.
Thank you, Duncan. Steiner space is a complex thing. Not good, not evil, just very big. In fact, I think that the Lyron Commonwealth is much like a cosmic horror. Some giant, blind, idiot god, just waiting there, happily making money and strudel, singing merrily to itself until someone comes over and flips the table. And then it becomes very, very upset. Anyways, moving to our right, because space has that, we have to talk about this strip of the inner sphere that's been nothing but hell. We're not talking about these a-holes here, because they're not from here, or rather, not recently. These are the clans, and for those uninitiated, they're a strange, deep space civilization of state-mandated, eugenics program, warrior caste, combat cult weirdos. Even by our standards, they're very weird. They also got completely wrecked by the phone company. It was a pretty okay time. For us, that is. So, here's what remains of the somewhat free Ryzehog Republic. So these guys were a thing, briefly, until these guys decided they shouldn't be. Because they were between these guys and Terra, which is controlled by the phone company, who wasn't cool with these guys taking a bite out of everything on their way to the telecoms HQ for very odd, strangely specific, quasi-spiritual reasons, which for very different, strangely specific, quasi-spiritual reasons, the phone company decided to murder them. Guys, as it turns out, you can make people show up to an ambush by just asking them. Remember, be kind, it pays dividends. Before that unpleasantness, Ryzehog was a state come from the space between House Kurita over here and House Steiner. These Kuritan buffer worlds were, before Kurita came along, an independently free principality of mostly culturally Scandinavian colonists. This small state was then overrun by House Kurita, who had to pry the worlds from them after 30 years of guerrilla warfare. They didn't go quietly. They were always a somewhat fiercely independent border region who resisted assimilation into the Dracons Combine. Over time, and some phone company intervention, Theodore Kurita was convinced of the benefits of creating a buffer zone between the houses of Steiner and Kurita by granting Ryzehog independence. Some of Kurita's guys were so mad at this that they resisted the government, and Kurita had to fight what was called the Ronin War. After Old Man Kurita gave his rowdy warriors the belt, Ryzehog became essentially a neutral buffer between the two superpowers of House Kurita and House Steiner. They were independent for almost 2 decades before these assholes came in, and in the end, they weren't anymore. This much of them survived as a rump state under the custodianship of Comstar, until 3070, when Clan Ghostbear more or less took them in. Because Ghostbear is of a similar cultural background and understands the importance of family. Good people mostly. Kinda clingy though. For the record, Ryzehog was not a paper dragon. They collapsed only after fighting bravely in the face of overwhelming odds. They gave the clanners a hard fight on every world, and in the deep black between stars. It was a Ryzehog pilot who kamikazed the Okan's warship and stopped the invasion for a year. Ryzehog is like that. They'll smile all day, but fuck around and the Viking comes out, and it doesn't stop until you or they are very, very dead. Next up, I have to talk about this. This was once the cradle of humanity, but it's been a hotbed of a lot of historical issues. Originally, the first circuit of what was called SL Comnet was laid out in this chunk of space once called the Hegemony. Then, well, there was this guy named Jerome Blake, and as fate would have it, he'd be the last employee of SL Comnet. But some assholes in time would think that everything that poured out of his goddamn mouth was the word of Right, so I guess next time I have to talk about the periphery, then the deep periphery. Great. Goat, play me out. Team, show these people how we pay our bills. See you next time. Stay safe.
Oh, far away from the light of terror, the remnants of another era. Join the crew, grab a brew, it's a damn periphery. We're full of pirates, cultists, rednecks, and opus girls. Look great in latex, join the crew, grab a brew, it's a damn periphery. We're stuck in the periphery, oh no, oh yeah. Ain't too much tech to be found here, at least it's not the inner sphere. Far away, out in the deep periphery. Far away, our way, out in the deep periphery. There's Randist knights and bandit countries, Viking duelists, murder junkies, houses out, noble suck, get out of periphery. Just bring your armies, bring your treasure, we'll drain it all at our own leisure right away. far away in the deep periphery. You're stuck in the periphery. Oh no, you lost everything you held dear. At least you're out in the inner sphere, far away, out in the deep periphery, far away, out in the deep periphery. Solo. And this is a keep of one, by the way. All right, back to the chorus one more time. You're stuck in the periphery. Oh no, you lost everything you held dear. At least you're out in the inner sphere, far away, out in the deep periphery, far away, out in the deep periphery. Yeah. Now get the fuck out.
If it were done when 'tis done, then 'twere well it were done quickly. If the assassination could trammel up the consequence, and catch with his Circe success, that but this blow might be the be-all and the end-all. Here, upon this bank and shoal of time, we jump the life to come. But in these cases we still have judgment here, that we but teach bloody instructions, which, being taught, return to plague the inventor. This even-handed justice commends the ingredients of our poison chalice to our own lips. He's here in double trust. First, as I am his kinsman and his subject, strong both against the deed. Then as his host, who should against his murderer shut the door, not bear the knife myself. Besides, this Duncan hath borne his faculties so meek, hath been so clear in his great office, that his virtues will plead like angels, trumpet-tongued, against the deep damnation of his taking off, and pity like a naked newborn babe, striding the blast, or heaven's cherubims, horsed upon the sightless couriers of the air, shall blow the horrid deed in every eye, that tears shall drown the wind. I have no spur to prick the sides of my intent, but only vaulting ambition, which o'erleaps itself and falls on the other. Ha ha! Shitpost achieved! Now where's my scotch?
I know I should probably make a Capellan joke about awards in the military, but they typically retire people by millimeters before they become politically hazardous by degrees. There are now 6 Battletech jokes.